Good afternoon and welcome to the Demolition Daily live stream. I'm your host, Mark Anthony, although today, as you'll be able to see, you can feel free to call me Ranty Ranterson, because despite my summary t-shirt and my always sunny disposition, I have a bone to pick. Ever since we launched this live stream, I've been trying desperately hard to accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative, and as the song goes, latch onto the affirmative, even though none of these things come particularly naturally to me. I will admit that early on I did let rip at a few tier one contractors that insisted that sites remain open despite scientific and medical advice to the contrary. But I quickly figured out that no one wants to give up 10 or 20 minutes of their day to listen to me piss and moan about things when the world around us is going to hell in a handbasket. So wherever possible, I've tried to maintain a strict policy of looking up and not down. And even though it goes against everything I stand for as a journalist, I've even allowed some bad news to go unreported. Just let it slide by without comment, because I figure that we all have enough on our collective plates right now. With that in mind, the story I'm about to tell you, after a slight detour, actually broke about a week ago, and I'd originally decided just to let it go, but it's niggled and gnawed away at the darkest parts of my brain all week, and frankly, if I don't let it out, my head is going to explode. Now, I could go in all guns blazing. Regular readers will know that on Demolition News, that's my usual approach, but we're all friends here now, aren't we? So let me take you on a little flight of fancy or two before we get to the main crux of today's rant. I'd like you to imagine that your neighbour's house caught fire. Mother, father, two young children, and their dog, Trevor, all escaped unharmed, but they have lost literally everything. They weren't insured. All the money they had was kept under the mattress. The mother has a terminal illness, and the father has been unable to work because he's a full-time carer for his dying spouse. So, being the good neighbour and charitable soul that you are, you start a campaign to raise some much-needed cash for this poor, unfortunate family. You raise a few hundred and then a few £1,000s, and then the local press gets wind of your charitable actions. All of a sudden, that few £100s is tens of thousands of pounds. The story is then picked up by the national TV news, and the nation takes that family to their hearts. That fund eventually peaks at £2 million. As the charity was your idea, you're invited to be the guest of honour when the £2 million cheque is presented. A few days later, you see the children and the dying mother stood looking at the burned out ruins of their former home. They're weeping uncontrollably. Trevor is howling at their feet. And just then, the father pulls up in a brand new Ferrari. Sat beside him is his new girlfriend, who's about half his age. The two of them are laughing at the destitute family. And as he drives by, he gives you the middle finger, while the eye candy in the passenger seat is counting a mound of cash. Now, a normal person would just leave the allegory there, but I'm on a roll now, so bear with me. It's 1984, and former punk and professional scruffbag Bob Geldof has just watched Michael Burke's harrowing report from Ethiopia, where a famine is threatening the lives of millions of people. Geldof knows he has to do something, but his star has long since faded. So he calls on his friend, Mijur, the voice behind Vienna and proud owner of the finest moustache in all of Christendom. Within hours, Midge penned a song that would go on to be the best-selling song of all time, or at least it was back in the day. A few days later, the great and the good of the UK music industry and Phil Collins are packed into a London recording studio, taking it in turns to record portions of that song, Do They Know It's Christmas by Band Aid. Fast forward 6 months, and those same musicians are taking part in the Live Aid concert. Now, in real life, that song and the concert raised about £30 million. And this is back when £30 million was a lot of money. And that was made possible, at least in part, by the fact that the artists gave their time free. The record companies waived their usual publishing rights to help the charity effort. And even the UK government waived the tax to further bolster the funds that were raised. Now imagine that if that wasn't the case, that Geldof and Ewer and Bowie, the Stones, Queen and U2 all gave their time free of charge. But the record companies insisted on taking their cut because, together with the government, they were planning a fundraiser of their own. Instead of all the money from Band Aid and Live Aid going to help starving Africans, some of that money was siphoned off at source and redirected into a second campaign. a campaign to send slimming tablets to the poor and starving of Ethiopia. Now, okay, I guess I'm straying a little bit off course now. So there was no burned down house. There's no new Ferrari. There was no top secret government plan to send slimming tablets to Ethiopia while Geldof and his cohorts were rallying to feed them. All of that is a work of fiction, as I'm sure you've probably gathered by now. So let's get back to the facts. The UK demolition and construction industries remain trapped in an on-off lockdown at the moment, in which work is as hard to find as a politician's humanity. Hundreds of thousands of working men and women are stuck at home. Many don't know when their next paycheck is coming or even if it is coming. Cash flow has become a cash trickle, and virtually everyone is staring now into an economic abyss. And then came the news earlier this week that the Construction Industry Training Board, or the CITB, had set aside £10.8 million to fund a social media campaign that would, and I'm doing this bit in inverted commas, show influencers' adventures in bricklaying, roofing, painting, and decorating. Think about that for a second. The CITB, an organisation that's barely fit for purpose at the best of times, was going to take almost £11 million of levy money and hand it over to a bunch of presumably young, hip and groovy social media types to hopefully encourage young people to join the construction industry. Now, I know a thing or two about social media. I've even written a book on the subject. I've even been described multiple times, as it happens, as a social media influencer myself. But let me tell you, I'm not your typical social media influencer. The real ones are probably half my age. They're beautiful, they're young, they're glamorous. And they appear to enjoy a truly aspirational lifestyle of fast cars, designer clothes, and sumptuous holidays in far-flung locations accompanied by a supermodel girlfriend or two. Now, we all know that much of this is fake. While social media has made some people fabulously wealthy, those are the minority. Platforms like Instagram are rife with photoshopped images of photoshopped lifestyles. In fact, I read recently there was a company, I think they were in Russia actually, were charging £300 a time for social media types to take selfies on board a private jet that never leaves the tarmac. Now, I'm old enough to know better. I can see through this facade of glamour. But what if you're not? What if you're a 15-year-old boy looking for a future career? What if you're a 16-year-old girl weighing up which college course to take to set you on your path to your first job? And let's just say that you stumble across the Instagram account of one of these social media influencers the CITB was so keen to throw money at. There you go. There's a nice photograph of a chiseled young guy sporting a hard hat as he heads off for his construction industry adventure. That photo on his Instagram feed is surrounded by his usual fare of expensive cars and expensive holidays. Or maybe it's a beautiful young girl who, for once, is not in a bikini on a white sand beach, but is instead in a high-vis vest on a demolition site. Maybe she's got a bit of brick dust, just dabbed artfully on one cheek for authenticity. Now, it's a long while since I was a 15-year-old boy, but if I'm looking at these pictures, I'm not thinking, oh yeah, demolition, that's a career for me and no mistake. I'm thinking, I want to be that social influencer too. I want a free sports car. I want to attend a full moon party in Thailand. And most of all, I really want to bang that girl in the high-vis vest who undoubtedly looks better in a bikini. Now, admittedly, these CITB plans have now been shelved, but they've been shelved only after they were apparently given the green light by an organisation that is quite clearly desperately out of touch with the industry it serves. At this point, I was going to make a joke about the CITB spending that 10 million to get somebody to write and perform a construction rap instead, just to show that they're down with the kids. But I'm actually afraid that they might take that suggestion seriously. Now, assuming you're still with me, you haven't fallen asleep, and that you're not like me, incandescent with rage, you're probably hoping for some resolution to my slimming pills to Ethiopia flight of fancy. So here we go. At the same time, the Construction Industry Training Board was planning to piss £10 million up the wall with a bunch of lifestyles of the rich and famous social media herberts that have never done a day's work in their life. The Lighthouse Club, the industry charity, is struggling to make ends meet. Now, that might appear to be a strange analogy, but is it? In my fictional tale, Geldof, Ewer, Bowie and the like were working for the greater good, helping their fellow man by giving their time free of charge and attempting to support the less fortunate while relying entirely upon voluntary donations from the likes of us. That, in a nutshell, is the Lighthouse Club right now. Then over here, we have my made-up record companies and British government that are illegally, or actually legally, siphoning off funds and then using them to the detriment of those they were set up to support. And that there is the CITB, an organisation that was planning to take money from an industry that desperately needs it and give it to a bunch of people that most definitely don't. I could go on. I could mention the fact that the CITB has spent 10.7 million on business improvement and IT in the last year, even while the skills shortage was worsening all around them. I could mention the fact that the CITB has spent £1.3 million, or originally spent £1.3 million on its Go Construct website way back in 2015. That it spent another 2.5 billion. Let me say it again. It has spent another 2.6 million promoting it, and that it had earmarked another 3.5 million pounds to promote that website over the next 3 years. I can even mention the fact that the CITB, in its infinite wisdom, decided not to record how many young people have actually joined apprenticeship schemes via the campaign that it started itself. But what's the point? We all know that the CITB is about as much use as an ashtray on a motorbike. That the CITB is to training what a chocolate fire guard is to public safety. But we also know that thanks to the levy scheme, they have the industry by the short and curlies. All of which casts the Lighthouse Club as mid-year, who wrote what, at the time, was the best-selling single of all time, and then gave away all the proceeds to those that needed it most. And there, driving by in a shiny new Ferrari with a middle finger raised out the window, is the CITB, speeding off to invest some of its newfound riches on a boob job for its eye-candy girlfriend. Good afternoon, Paul. Glad to see you here. As always, sorry about the rant. It's Friday, what can I tell you? And we're going into a long weekend. So, yeah, just need to get that off my mind. It is a holiday weekend, as I've just mentioned, which means that unless I can sneak away when Mrs. Demolition News isn't looking, I won't be here again until Tuesday, which is actually the beginning of the final week of these Demolition Daily live streams. All things being equal, we're going to do a bumper edition on Friday of next week. We've already got Neil Edwards of the Builders Conference lined up to be our guest. Neil will be back for the third time, and all things being equal, we'll have another guest making a return for the second time, just to play us out and bring this whole thing to a nice, neat conclusion. But until then, stay safe, stay positive, look after yourselves, your family, and your friends, and your colleagues, and anybody else you can think of. I will see you again probably on Tuesday, as I say, unless I can sneak away when She Who Never Smiles isn't looking. And I'll see you again on Tuesday. Until then, look after yourselves, and thanks for joining us.